Caledonian Elixir. Welcome to the Caledonian Elixir. This is a podcast that takes a tragic deep dive into the darkest recesses of the human condition. I'm your host Vincent, and today on the Elixir I'm going to discuss a brain-bending cult that believed in UFOs and extraterrestrial beings. Believed in them so much that in March 1997, 39 members of this cult ritually ended their own lives, believing death would transform them into extraterrestrials. The name of this cult is Heaven's Gate. Now, to break down Heaven's Gate, it's important to view their history. For most of its years in existence, it was called the Human Individual Metamorphosis, and at the start it existed as just two people, its founders Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Lou Nettles. However, to explain what Heaven's Gate was really about and how it ended in mass suicide, I need to describe to you its origin. That is, the origin of Nettles and Applewhite. Bonnie Lou Nettles was born in 1927. Ironically, she did not have a religious background. She was a native of Houston, Texas, and was employed at a young age as a nurse. As a young adult, she was spiritually literate, with a fascination of astrology and theosophy. She even wrote an astrology column for a local newspaper. But when in her early 20s, Nettles married, then had 4 children. In spite of this, due to marital disagreements, her relationship began to disintegrate, and with a failing marriage and a frantic work schedule, Bonnie Nettles was left wandering aimlessly through her life, until one day everything changed when a patient walked through the doors of her Houston hospital. Marshall Hearth Applewhite was born in 1932. A Texan by birth, he is the son of a Presbyterian preacher. Applewhite's first love was music. He served as a campus leader in a cappella group, and in early adulthood entered college, graduating with a degree in philosophy. After graduation, however, he married and had 2 kids. But a scandal implicating Applewhite in a homosexual relationship became public knowledge. As a result, his marriage failed, and he bounced between teaching music and studying New Age spirituality. However, like Nettles, Applewhite's life changed forever when in 1972 he met Bonnie Nettles in the hospital of Houston. While the main reason Applewhite and Nettles clicked may have been that both suffered broken relationships just prior to meeting, but they also had an interest in spirituality and New Age thought. But in the months following, they forged a lasting spiritual bond that became the core of Heaven's Gate. In 1976, Applewhite explained the life-changing effect she had on him by saying, "I felt I had known her forever." The two of them had become seekers of spiritual enlightenment. They studied, read everything they could get their hands on. For a while they even owned a theosophy and theology bookstore. But then in July 1973, their period of seeking ended, when they reached a defined view of themselves while camping along the river in Oregon. They had a new identity as well as a new name. From here on in, they referred to themselves as the Two, based on a reference from the Book of Daniel. In time, they would also become known as T and Do. The Two's new teaching was a nexus of ufology and Christianity. They declared that a UFO would descend and a form of modern-day rapture would ensue, transforming them and everyone who followed to the evolutionary level above human. This was a process that involved a biological and chemical change. Therefore, physical death by suicide was not being called for. at least not yet. Soon after, the two recruited their first member, a woman called Sharon, who decided after just 6 days of meeting them to accept their spiritual teaching, and like them, she chose to abandon her family and property. The small group canvassed the country, speaking to any audience that would hire them. By the end of 1975, Heaven's Gate had over 40 converts, with even a meeting at the Worldport in Oregon making national news and attracting an audience of more than 300 people. The converts from Worldport and those who joined earlier got together on the slopes of the Rocky Mountains, and there they found a location bathed under by a canopy of stars. Now they could begin severing attachments to humanity, starting that process of transforming their bodies into extraterrestrial beings. As the years passed, members came and went. Some were expelled, but Heaven's Gate went from a loose social group into a blossoming spiritual collective, a distinct 20th century UFO religion. However, in 1985, everything changed when Bonnie Lou Nettles, the co-founder of the cult, died. Nettles, in her final years, suffered deteriorating health. She had lost an eye to eye cancer, but it was in June 1985 that she succumbed to liver cancer. Her death was a watershed moment for Heaven's Gate. Not only is it left Doe, the sole leader, it incidentally threatened the cohesion and theology of Heaven's Gate. I mean, think about it. Applewhite now had to respond not only to the shock of Nettles' death, but also the expectations of the members of the cult. So, in the past, he and Nettles always maintained they would be transformed into extraterrestrial beings and would board a UFO, beginning a new existence. In addition, they were adamant you did not have to die for this transition. So how did Applewhite explain the death of Nettles without the transformation? Well, he changed the theology and philosophy of Heaven's Gate. He now claimed that the body simply couldn't handle the stress of outer space, nor the evolution to the next level. Therefore, there was to be no mid-air rapture involving UFOs. Instead, there was a coming environmental and technological apocalypse, and ascension to the next evolutionary level could only be attained in non-corporeal form. In other words, they would need to abandon their bodies. In a 1992 satellite broadcast, Doe stated, "Here we are, at the end of the age, and it's harvest time. Harvest means that it's time for a recycling of souls." It is at this juncture where Heaven's Gate assumed the mantle of a cult with not just a warped view of reality, but accepted an inevitable destiny of ritualistic self-mutilation, then suicide. The bodies of the members were now considered a complete hindrance to ascension. Doe had jettisoned any thought or teaching of a transformation of the body. It was but a mere vehicle now, to be discarded at the right time, that was. Talks of suicide amongst members of Heaven's Gate occurred as early as 1991, with Applewhite asking the members, "What if we had to exit our vehicles by our own choice, as Jesus Christ did? Did we, any of us, have a problem with that?" Well, as it turned out, only one member did, and he picked up his bags and left that night. But again, here Heaven's Gate provided its members a degree of free agency, so individuals could leave, unlike those in the People's Temple cult. Members of Heaven's Gate now lived together in a mansion that rented in Santa Fe, California, but they didn't allow their surroundings to soften their devotion. They became obsessed with self-control. By 1994, members received medical castration. Even Applewhite himself was castrated. After all, castration is an effective way to control the body, specifically the sex instinct. So for a while, Heaven's Gate, cocooned behind the walls of her mansion, practiced meticulously a purging of every biological impulse. Then, literally, out of space, appeared an object that was the confirmation they were looking for. This was the Hale-Bopp comet. From what we know, in 1996, one of the group's members, Toledo it's believed, listened to the Art Bell radio show, a late-night discussion programme on the paranormal and occult. It was on that radio show that it was claimed a massive UFO, almost the size of the Earth, was trailing the comet. A comet, incidentally, that was to approach the Earth. This was enough for Applewhite. It was a signal of the beginning of the end. On March 22nd, 1997, 39 members of Heaven's Gate committed suicide. In 3 waves, members consumed a poisonous combination of barbiturates and alcohol. Then their breath slowed and their bodies failed. In addition, plastic bags were tied over their heads, causing asphyxiation. Every member was dressed in identical customised uniform, with matching patches on their arm reading Heaven's Gate await him. Members of each wave were cleaned, then draped with purple shrouds, as their bodies lay dead on rows of bed bunks before it was the turn for the next wave to repeat the same process. Applewhite ended his life last the next day. Therefore, he must have wandered the rooms and halls of their Santa Fe mansion as all his followers and friends' bodies began decomposing. When ex-member Neody received mail posted by Heaven's Gate informing him of his suicide, he travelled to their Santa Fe mansion. Once at the compound, he discovered a side door ajar. He immediately entered and was overwhelmed by the smell of death. There was nothing left of Heaven's Gate, so Neody called 911, reported the police of the mass suicide, then left. When the bodies were discovered by the medics, there was difficulty with identification, as all members not only dressed the same, but looked the same. Same haircuts, all even had the same amount of money in their pockets, $5 bill and 3 quarters, for some arcane obscure reason. But when the authorities studied the documents of the mansion, it was revealed Heaven's Gate chose this time and date to exit their vehicles due to the arrival of the comet Hale-Bopp. It was time to willfully destroy their bodies and evolve into the next evolutionary level, with new alien bodies waiting for them in the massive spaceship that was trailing the comet. Now, this story sounds like a figment of a dark imagination. A mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, containing discarded, decaying bodies whose souls exited this world for a cosmic existence in the next level. A cult who lived by a strange brew of Christianity, castration, and science fiction. But the story of Heaven's Gate doesn't end here. After the suicide, the authorities realised that there were members of Heaven's Gate still alive who left the cult earlier, but still held to their belief systems. Would these members also take their lives, viewing the mass suicide in the mansion as a kind of signal to suicide for all those who followed the beliefs? After all, the UFO and the tail of the comet would only be near Earth for so long, and the window for the transmigrations of souls was closing. So, the race was on to track down the last members of the Heaven's Gate cult and stop them before they could kill themselves. However, not all could be saved. In less than a month, 2 more members took their own lives in a similar fashion in a hotel. The death count continued. I think the question most of you who are listening or asking is, why did these people take their lives? Was it brainwashing? mental illness. Many of those who encountered Heaven's Gate as early as the 1970s warned others about the dangers of the group. One woman who joined in 1975, then left, commented, "These people are dangerous. It isn't hypnosis, it's thought transplant." I've discussed in previous episodes the brainwashing techniques used in MK Ultra, or the intense control the People's Temple had over the lives of those it ensnared, and how that ended. But I don't think the converts to Heaven's Gate were overtly brainwashed using drugs, psychic driving or hypnosis. Nor do I think they wandered carelessly, defenceless, into a world of torture. There was no Manchurian candidates in Heaven's Gate. You see, brainwashing makes it easier for people to accept why individuals would join Heaven's Gate. It makes members victims instead of converts. It delegitimises their teachings. After all, not all religions make as much sense as those ones that claim reincarnation or resurrection. Heaven's Gate is a threat to the social order, just as Christianity or Buddhism once was. I mean, don't forget, martyrdom was once a practice by Christians. However, I believe that Bonnie Lou Nettles' death rocked Applewhite more than most historians realise. I think Nettles' death left Applewhite in a prolonged state of bereavement, a state he never really recovered from. And to me, this is apparent when viewing the Heaven's Gate video footage, as whenever Nettles' name is invoked, Applewhite is visibly upset. In other words, her death created a void in him, leaving his sense of meaning and the social order torn apart. He was in a world of his own imagined vehemence, brought on by the pain of loss. As a result, he dissociated his life from the pain the only way he knew how to: Heaven's Gate. And he was willing to use Heaven's Gate to escape and bring as many people with him into death as possible. So, this, maybe, is the real overlooked story of Heaven's Gate. That life without meaning, belonging and love inevitably ends in tragedy. The stories of extraterrestrials, heaven, they're just stories, weaved together to create an order out of meaning, a narrative out of life. But without the love and belonging, it isn't enough. Just as it wasn't enough for Marshall Applewhite. Well, everyone, that's the end of Heaven's Gate. I hope you learned something and enjoyed. And don't forget to subscribe or like. And I'll catch you later.